The winter of 1873 brought harsh winds to the Oregon Territory, and with them came desperate men seeking easy fortune. Sarah Mitchell, barely 16 years old, had known darkness since birth. Her world was filled with sounds, smells, and touches that others took for granted. She could identify a person by their footsteps, tell the weather by the way air moved across her face, and navigate her family's small cabin with perfect precision. Her father, Thomas Mitchell, worked the lumber camps during good seasons, but injury had kept him home for months. Her mother, Mary, took in washing from the nearby town to keep food on their table. They lived simply but with love, and Sarah had never felt her blindness as a burden until the day the strangers arrived. 3 men rode up to their cabin on a gray afternoon when storm clouds gathered overhead. Sarah heard their horses before anyone else, the way the animals snorted and stamped with exhaustion. These were not the gentle sounds of neighbors' well-cared-for animals, but the harsh breathing of horses ridden too hard and too far. "Thomas Mitchell?" The voice was rough, like gravel scraped against wood. Sarah stood near the window, her hand resting on the wooden frame as she listened. "That's me," her father replied, and Sarah heard the caution in his tone. "We hear you got debts. Heard you borrowed money from McNeil's bank and can't pay it back." Sarah's heart began to race. She knew about the loan. Her father had needed money for medicine when his leg was broken in the logging accident. The local banker, Ezra McNeil, was known for his harsh terms and quick foreclosures. "I got an arrangement with McNeil," her father said. "We're working it out." The stranger laughed, but there was no humor in it. "McNeil sold your debt to us. We're here to collect what's owed, plus interest. Comes to $230. Sarah heard her mother's sharp intake of breath from the kitchen. $200 might as well have been $2,000 for people like them. "I don't have that kind of money," Thomas said quietly. "But I can work. I can pay it off over time." "Time's up, Mitchell. We want payment now." Sarah felt her way along the wall toward the main room, her bare feet silent on the wooden floor. She needed to hear everything, to understand what was happening to her family. "Please," her mother's voice came from the doorway. "We have nothing of value, just our home and a few belongings." "Oh, we know exactly what you have," said a second voice, younger and somehow crueler than the first. "We've been watching this place, know all about your family." Sarah's blood turned cold as she realized the meaning behind his words. "You got a daughter?" the first man continued. "Pretty thing, even if she can't see. Some folks don't mind that, might even prefer it if you understand my meaning." "No," her father's voice was steel. "You're not touching my daughter." "Then you better find that money real quick." Sarah heard the sound of guns being drawn, the distinctive metallic click that every frontier family knew meant deadly serious trouble. Her father was unarmed. He'd sold his rifle months ago to buy food. "There are places," the third man spoke for the first time, his voice smooth and educated, which somehow made his words more frightening. "Places where a young woman can work off a debt. Might take her a few years, but she'd earn enough to clear what you owe." "What kind of work?" Mary asked, though Sarah could tell from her mother's trembling voice that she already suspected the answer. "The kind that don't require seeing," the smooth voice replied with a chuckle. Sarah stepped into the room then, her chin raised despite her fear. "I can hear everything you're saying." The men turned toward her, and she felt their eyes examining her like she was livestock at auction. She wore a simple blue dress her mother had made, and her long brown hair was braided neatly down her back. Despite her disability, country life had made her strong and healthy. "Well, look at that," the young, cruel voice said. "She's got spirit. That's worth extra." "You're talking about selling me," Sarah said clearly. "Like I'm property." "Smart, too," the first man observed. "Gets better and better." Thomas Mitchell stepped between his daughter and the strangers. "I won't let you take her." "Then you'll die, and we'll take her anyway," came the cold reply. "Your choice, Mitchell. We leave here with either $230 or your daughter. Either way, the debt gets settled." Sarah's mind raced. She'd heard stories of girls who disappeared, taken to work in saloons and worse places in distant cities. Some were never seen again, others returned broken in ways that couldn't be healed. "How long do we have to decide?" she asked, surprising everyone, including herself. "Sarah, no," her father said firmly. "How long?" she repeated. "Till sunrise tomorrow," the leader said. "We'll be camping by the creek. Come dawn, one way or another. We're riding out of here with what we came for." The three men mounted their horses and rode toward the creek that ran behind the Mitchell property. Sarah listened to their horses' hoofbeats fade into the distance, then turned to her parents. "We have to run," her mother said immediately. "Tonight. We'll go to Portland, find help." "They'll catch us," Thomas replied grimly. "Look at me, Mary. I can barely walk on this leg, and winter's coming hard. We wouldn't make it 10 miles before they tracked us down." Sarah sat down heavily in her father's chair by the fireplace. The flames crackled and popped, their heat warming her face while her heart stayed cold with fear. "There might be another way," she said slowly. That night, while her parents whispered plans they couldn't execute and prayed for miracles they didn't expect, Sarah made her own decision. She would not let these men destroy her family. But she also knew that sometimes the only way to win was to change the game entirely. As dawn approached, she began to prepare for whatever came next. The first light of dawn was still an hour away when Sarah slipped out of the cabin. Her parents slept fitfully, exhausted from a night of worry and desperate planning. She moved silently across the familiar ground, her feet finding the path to the creek by memory and instinct. She had spent the dark hours listening and thinking. The three men had made their camp about a quarter-mile downstream, and she could smell their fire smoke carried on the morning breeze. What they didn't know was that Sarah had explored every inch of this land since childhood. She knew places they would never think to look, sounds they wouldn't recognize as warning signals. But she also knew something else. Just before sunset the previous evening, she had heard other horses passing by their property. Not the tired, abused animals the debt collectors rode, but strong, well-cared-for horses with riders who moved quietly and purposefully. Native travelers passed through this area regularly, following old trading routes between the mountains and the valleys. Most settlers feared them, but Sarah's family had always been different. Her father had fought alongside native warriors during earlier troubles with land grabbers and cattle thieves. He'd learned to respect their ways and had taught Sarah to listen carefully to the languages of the wind and forest that they understood better than anyone. The horses she'd heard were carrying someone who belonged to this land in ways the debt collectors never could. As she made her way toward the creek, Sarah heard voices from the men's camp. They were awake early, planning their approach to the cabin. She crept closer, using skills her blindness had forced her to develop. Without sight to rely on, she had become expert at moving silently and reading the signs others missed. "The girl's our best bet," the smooth-voiced man was saying. "Pretty young thing like that, even blind, she'll bring good money in San Francisco. Some of those rich men like their women helpless." "What if the father fights?" asked the young, cruel voice. "Then we kill him quick and take her anyway. The mother, too, if she causes trouble. Dead folks can't report what happened here." Sarah's hands clenched into fists, but she forced herself to remain calm. She needed to hear their full plan. "We'll give them another hour," the leader decided. "Let them sweat a little more. Then ride up and finish this business." Sarah began to back away from their camp, but froze as she heard new sounds. Footsteps, so quiet she almost missed them. Someone was approaching through the forest, moving with the silent grace of a hunter. She pressed herself against a large tree and waited. The footsteps came closer, then stopped just a few feet away. Sarah held her breath. "You should not be here alone, young sister." The voice was soft, speaking English with the careful precision of someone for whom it was a learned language. Sarah turned toward the sound. "Who are you?" she whispered. "I am called Kintpuash by my people. Some white men call me Captain Jack. But names matter less than actions, and right now we both need to act carefully." Sarah had heard that name. Kintpuash was a Modoc leader who had fought the U.S. Army just 2 years earlier in the lava beds far to the south. The newspapers had called him a dangerous renegade, but her father had said the man was simply trying to protect his people's homeland. "You're far from Modoc country," she whispered. "The whole earth is Modoc country," he replied gently. "But you are right. I travel north because there are things to be done, debts to be paid that have nothing to do with white man's money." "How do you know about the debt?" Sarah asked, surprised. "I have been watching since yesterday. I know about the men who want to steal you. I know about your family's troubles." He paused, and Sarah heard him settle down beside her hiding spot. "I also know you are here alone, planning something dangerous." Sarah felt tears she'd been holding back begin to flow. "They're going to take me no matter what. Even if my parents had the money, these men would just find another excuse. I can tell from their voices they're the kind who enjoy hurting people." "Yes," Kintpuash agreed quietly. "I have met such men before. They wear different faces and speak different languages. But the evil in their hearts is always the same. So what can we do?" "We can change their plans," the Modoc said. "But it will require trust between us, and you must be braver than any 16-year-old should have to be." He began to outline his idea. It was dangerous and depended on perfect timing, but it might be their only chance to save Sarah's family and stop these men from hurting anyone else. The plan was simple in concept, but difficult in execution. Sarah would return to the cabin and tell her parents she had decided to go with the men to protect her family. When the debt collectors came to collect her, she would cooperate completely, seeming resigned to her fate. But Kintpuash would be tracking them from the moment they left the Mitchell property. At the right moment, when they had traveled far enough from any settlers who might interfere, he would act. "What if something goes wrong?" Sarah asked. "What if you can't find us, or there are too many of them?" "Then I will die trying to save you," Kintpuash said simply. "But I do not plan to die today." Sarah felt something being pressed into her hand. It was small and round, made of carved stone. "This is a medicine stone from my grandmother," the Modoc explained. "It carries the strength of many generations of strong women. When the time comes for action, hold it tight and remember that you are not helpless, no matter what anyone tells you." As the sky began to lighten, Sarah made her way back to the cabin. Her parents were awake now, standing by the window, watching for the debt collector's approach. "Sarah, where have you been?" her mother cried, rushing to embrace her. "Thinking," Sarah replied, "and I've made my decision." She told them about her plan to go with the men, but not about Kintpuash. Her parents protested and pleaded, but Sarah remained firm. It was the only way to keep them alive. When the 3 men rode up to the cabin an hour later, they found the Mitchell family waiting on the front porch. Thomas Mitchell held his wife as she wept. Sarah stood apart from them, her small traveling bag in her hands and her chin raised with dignity. "Smart choice," the leader said, dismounting from his horse. "Makes this easier for everyone." "You have 2 pennies?" Sarah asked clearly. The men looked confused. "What?" "You said you were trading me for money. My father's debt was $230. But right now, all you have to actually pay him is whatever coins are in your pockets. So you're really trading me for just a few pennies." The smooth-voiced man laughed. "Clever girl. You're right." He reached into his pocket and pulled out 2 copper pennies. He tossed them onto the porch where they clinked against the wooden boards. "There's your payment, Mitchell. Your daughter is ours now." Sarah walked to her parents and kissed each of them goodbye. "Remember what Papa always taught me," she whispered to her mother. "Sometimes the best way to escape a trap is to walk right into it." As she climbed onto the spare horse the men had brought for her, Sarah felt the medicine stone in her pocket and thought of the Modoc warrior following somewhere in the forest behind them. The real plan was just beginning. The horses moved at a steady pace through the forest trails, heading north toward the main road that would eventually take them to Portland and then to San Francisco. Sarah rode between the younger man and the one with the smooth voice, while the leader stayed ahead, constantly watching for trouble. Sarah kept careful track of their route by listening to the sounds around her. Water running over rocks told her they were following the creek. The echo of hoofbeats against canyon walls meant they were passing through the narrow gorge her father had shown her years ago. The changing calls of different birds marked their progress through various types of forest. She also listened for any sign of Kintpuwash following them, but heard nothing. Either he was incredibly skilled at moving unseen, or something had gone wrong with their plan. "How much further to the main road?" the smooth-voiced man asked after they had been traveling for 2 hours. "Another hour through these trails," the leader replied. "Once we reach the main road, we can make better time." "Good. I'll be glad to get away from this wilderness. Too many places for trouble to hide." Sarah's horse stumbled slightly on the rocky trail, and she gripped the saddle horn to keep her balance. As she did, her hand brushed against her pocket where the medicine stone rested. She thought about Kintpuwash's words about strong women and felt a flicker of hope return. They were climbing now, following a trail that wound up the side of a steep hill. Sarah remembered this place. At the top was a clearing where travelers often stopped to rest their horses and enjoy the view of the valley below. It was also completely surrounded by thick forest and large rocks that would provide perfect cover for someone planning an ambush. "We'll stop at the top," the leader announced. "Rest the horses and eat something before we hit the main road." Sarah's heart began to race. If Kintpuwash was going to act, this would be the perfect place. But she also knew that these men were dangerous and well-armed. Even with the element of surprise, the Modoc warrior would be facing terrible odds. When they reached the clearing, the men dismounted and tied their horses to trees at the edge of the open space. Sarah remained mounted until the young one roughly pulled her down from her horse. "Sit there and don't move," he ordered, pointing toward a fallen log. Sarah made her way to the log and sat down, using the movement to survey her surroundings. The clearing was about 50 feet across, with tall trees on all sides and several large boulders scattered around the edges. She could hear a small stream running somewhere nearby. The men built a small fire and began preparing a simple meal of dried meat and hardtack. They were relaxed now, confident that they had successfully completed the difficult part of their task. Their conversation turned to how they would split the money once Sarah was sold. "She'll bring at least 500, the smooth-voiced man estimated. "Maybe more if we clean her up and put her in a proper dress." "Don't forget our expenses," the leader said. "We got travel costs, and we'll need to pay for lodging in San Francisco while we find the right buyer." Sarah listened to them discuss her future as if she were a piece of merchandise, and felt anger burning in her chest. These men saw her blindness as something that made her helpless, but they had no idea how much her other senses had developed to compensate. She heard it before any of them did. The soft whistle of an arrow cutting through air. The young man dropped his cup of coffee and looked down in amazement at the feathered shaft protruding from his shoulder. He opened his mouth to cry out, but a second arrow took him in the throat, and he fell backward without making a sound. The leader and the smooth-voiced man jumped to their feet, drawing their guns and scanning the tree line for their attacker. "Show yourself!" the leader shouted. "We know you're out there!" Kinpuash's voice came from the forest, seeming to echo from several directions at once. "Release the girl, and you may leave this place alive." "Like hell!" the leader snarled. He grabbed Sarah by the arm and hauled her to her feet, pressing his gun against her temple. "Come out where I can see you, or I'll put a bullet in her head." Sarah felt the cold metal of the gun barrel against her skin, but she also felt the medicine stone in her pocket and remembered everything her father had taught her about staying calm in dangerous situations. "You will not harm her," Kinpuash's voice replied, now clearly coming from a position behind the large boulder to Sarah's left. "Watch me," the leader said. But as he spoke, Sarah heard the smooth-voiced man's sharp intake of breath. "Boss," the man whispered, "look around. Really look." Sarah understood what he meant. Now that she was listening for them, she could hear the subtle sounds of multiple people moving through the forest around the clearing. Kinpuash had not come alone. "How many?" the leader asked quietly, his gun still pressed against Sarah's head. "At least 6, came the reply. "Maybe more." The Modoc voice spoke again, closer now. "My brothers and I have been hunting men like you for many moons, men who steal women and children from their families. We know your kind well." Sarah felt the leader's hand trembling slightly as he held the gun. He was beginning to understand that he had walked into a trap as carefully planned as any he had ever set. "What do you want?" he called out. "Justice," Kinpuash replied simply. Suddenly, Sarah felt a gentle touch on her free hand. Fingers pressed something small into her palm, another stone, warm from someone's grip. Then Kinpuash's voice whispered directly into her ear, so quietly that the men holding her couldn't hear. "When I say now, fall to your knees and cover your head." The leader was still looking around wildly, trying to spot all the hidden warriors, when Kinpuash spoke one more time. "You have taken your last child from her family." "Now," he whispered. Sarah dropped to her knees and covered her head with her hands. The clearing erupted in war cries and the sound of arrows whistling through the air. She heard the leader curse and stumble backward, his gun firing harmlessly into the trees. The smooth-voiced man screamed once, then fell silent. When the sounds of battle ended, Sarah felt a gentle hand on her shoulder. "It is finished, young sister," Kinpuash said softly. "You are safe." Sarah stood up slowly, her legs shaking with relief. "Are they dead?" "The young one and the smooth-talking one, yes. The leader lives, but he will never harm another person. He will spend his remaining days warning others about what happens to men who trade in human misery." Kinpuash helped Sarah to one of the horses. As they prepared to leave the clearing, he grasped her hand firmly and whispered words that would stay with her for the rest of her life. "You are stronger than they ever imagined, braver than they could understand, and worth more than all the gold in their greedy hearts. Never let anyone tell you that your darkness makes you less than whole." 3 days later, Sarah was back home with her parents. The debt had been settled in an unexpected way. The leader, grateful to be alive, had signed papers forgiving all money owed and had left the territory forever. Years later, when Sarah had become a teacher for other blind children, she would tell them the story of how a Modoc wanderer had taught her that true value could never be measured in coins, and that sometimes the greatest strength comes from walking fearlessly into the darkness that frightens others. She never forgot the feeling of those 2 pennies clinking on her family's porch, or the warmth of the medicine stones that had given her courage when courage seemed impossible. Most of all, she never forgot the whispered words that had taught her to see her own worth clearly, even in a world that often refused to see it at all.